become the voice actor and the person who wrote the book. Because every time I went into a chapter, I became part of it. I could not completely remove myself from the story. Because over the years, I have mastered telling people about the book, so I can completely remove myself from the experiences. But reading it, I was actually there. I lived it again.
I'm Jon Gower. I'm a Welsh writer, and I'm in the company of Eric Ngalle Charles, who is a very fantastic writer who came from a long way away in Cameroon via Russia to Wales, where he's now part of the literary community, and it pleases me beyond measure to be able to describe him as a friend. So, Eric, you started life in a small, remote village in Cameroon, and part of your destiny was that you were going to go to Europe, and your mother helped to arrange a ticket for you to go, and things were looking good at that point, but then they stopped looking good after that point.
Yes. Everything, what's that word? It was honky-dory? Yes, everything was fine until I arrived in Malta. Yes, and then I moved from the frying pan into the fire then. Because instead of going to my destination, which was Bruges in Belgium, I ended up with a one-way student visa to Russia. Yeah.
So your mother had actually pulled together money because she thought you would be getting a special education in Europe. She had exchanged money with people who would arrange your passage. Let's call them human traffickers just for the shorthand of it. So you found yourself then in Russia with how much money in your pocket?
I think it was $3, which is the equivalent of 2,000 franc CFA, Cameroonian currency. Yes.
So whether it's in Central African francs or rubles or dollars, it's not a lot of money.
No.
But also, you had no command of Russian at all. In fact, probably you didn't have any Russian at all.
I didn't have. It was shocking when the lady at the front at the airport welcomed me in Russian, and I'm all blank, because normally as students they give you like preparatory courses, language course, where the dobre pajalo adverasia, you say spasiba, and I'm like, yeah. But she stamped my passport with a smile and welcomed me into the country.
You had to then learn Russian because you were in Russia, you had no money, and very rapidly acquiring the language was one of the tools of survival for you.
That is correct. And ironically, when I started learning this language, the person who taught me the language, Tiocha Vera, a couple of months later, she died. And when she died, in Cameroon, or in the small village of Boya, where I'm from, when someone dies, everybody knows. Even if you don't know them, you cry. But weirdly, Tiocha Vera was teaching me the language one evening, and the next evening she disappeared. It was only about 2 months later that I found out she was dead. And that was the first time I realized, geez, I'm not in Cameroon anymore. Everything was different, yeah. So, Tiocha Vera is my first memory of total loss, total displacement. Yeah.
It's also a bit colder in Russia, as I understand, to the foothills of Mount Cameroon.
Imagine, when I left Cameroon, we are in what we call the peak of our summer. This is May, and I was dressed for the average European summer, with my jeans and my jacket that was made of chicken feathers. I landed in Moscow. I almost died. I could not speak. My lips were numb, frozen, and I was surprised why people walked very fast. Years later, then I realized that it was too cold, so you can't stand in one spot. But one of the memories that I have is my mom had gone through the struggle of making me a goosey pudding in our context, and I was starving. So I reached into my bag. It was rock solid. Yeah.
Like rock cake.
I was sucking on it, but yeah, everything was a shock. And sometimes even now, when I travel back in those memories, I have nightmares, because if I were placed in that situation now, I think the easier option would have been to jump on the Volgograd River or something. Yeah.
Your time in Russia was full of challenges, and writing about them is itself a challenge, because, as you've just suggested, it triggers memories, it brings back trauma. And also, in the case of your memoirs, you were writing about real people. You were writing about your mother and your family and so on. And with that comes a whole raft of ethical decisions. So writing a memoir isn't a simple thing of just saying, oh, let me remember everything I can about this tough time in Russia.
Yes, you are true. That is why when I was in 2016, when I finally decided to write it, I was using the facilities at Cardiff Central Library. And there are many chapters that I wrote, read, destroyed, and wrote again. Because most of the characters in this memoir are alive, apart from my auntie and the husband, but everyone else is alive. And yeah, so I had to be really careful. But you see, I still had this kind of venom, this bile, because I thought writing it would be like punishing those who saw that I went through all those kind of passage. Yeah, so I made the decision of writing it, reading it, rewriting it, until I got to where it was. And thankfully, when I submitted the finished piece to Parthian, I mean, initially I didn't really know what was going on, but when Richard intervened, we reduced it was about 130,000 words that I had written. It was pure venom, but we spoke about it and we reduced it to about 70,000 words to what it is now. Yeah.
You had reason to be venomous because you had some very testing, challenging times in Russia. Just tell me about the general experience of being lost on another continent.
And the worst thing was knowing fully well that no matter how loud you scream, you'll not have any help. Yeah, so I did anything that came my way, I did. I didn't really care whether I was going to die or I had already made up my mind. In fact, I will go back to the tragedy of what happened in Cameroon, because that was the day I died. Anything else that happened to me, it never really mattered. But in Russia, it would have been better if I was killed by the elements or by the strangers that I met, rather than what my father's family did to me. So, for the first 1.5 years in Russia, I really did not care about my life. I had given up. In fact, my mother had already cried for me. She had already given up the fact that I would never return, you know. So, yeah, so I lived on the edge, and it didn't really bother me.
Even before you got to Russia, though, there had been some unspeakable things. When I first read a few chapters of your memoir, there's a moment when you are set aside a grave. And that actually chilled me to the marrow, simply because of the complicated psychology of what was going on. So take us back to that night in Cameroon when you were presented with a very awful proposition.
Yes, and to be honest, my mother now she doesn't know what happened at that graveyard. My sister does not know. Basically, they took me to Mulam Mbua's house, left me there, and in the middle of the night, he took me to a children's graveyard, and he said he was going to invoke my father's spirit, and I was made to stand on top of a machete, you know, and he used razor blades and sliced. So if you see all over my joints, I have 7 marks everywhere. He sliced me, but he made sure that the blood flowed onto the machete. And what I now know was this place was a children's graveyard. You know, in the middle of the night, with a bush lamp, you see ants and maggots making merry with your blood, as if it was some kind of a frenzy. And he took money from my mother, saying I never saw my father's ghost. Instead, I'm in the children's cemetery in Tikon. I'm thinking, I could get bitten by a rhinoceros viper, and that would be the end of me. And then this dude is jumping around, dancing. And we were there till early morning, but eventually we still lost the court case. So yeah, he duped my parents, duped me, exposed me to this element. But when I think about this thing, maybe it actually worked. Because I was possessed in Russia. The things that I had to do were not human. So maybe Molang Mambo in the children's cemetery was probably building me up for Russia, not necessarily the court case. So I don't know.
So let's talk about those things you had to do in Russia when you were, quote, possessed, unquote. You didn't always keep your clothes on, did you?
I didn't because I had to feed myself. So I had girlfriends, and through them I had some other benefits, but most importantly I was fed. This is what I said to my daughter the other day, that she might have a brother or a sister who's maybe 21 or 22 years old, because I've blamed America a lot for a lot of things, but in Russia, we were seen as exotic black men from the continent of Africa. So yes, but this was it. All of these kind of weird experiences.
The weirdest, though, and my favourite, is how at one point you were saved by Boney M. Now, I'll admit I'm not a big fan of Boney M, but because of how they helped you out, I'm a bit fonder of them now.
Yes. Liz Mitchell's picture became a passport to me. I were in Stavropol, and
so they were on tour.
They were on tour. They were here in Stavropol, and they were performing in Dynamo Stadium. And our friend, who thought it was a good idea to start an African dance group, brought us these tickets. But he had also told the Boney M that, listen, these guys are hungry, they really need food. So whilst we came in Dynamo, they danced, they were making gymnastics. My friend is actually in France now, Richard, we're dancing. After this dance, they took us to a place called Prospect Mira, and we stayed in the hotel. Mola, we ate.
The story in Russia is of facing awful racism.
Yeah.
There were all sorts of practical difficulties with living there. But there was also this other big difficulty facing you, which was getting out of the place. And you managed to leave Russia with a passport which had a photograph of someone that bore very little resemblance to you.
Yes.
Because your passport was... Well, it's the passport of a dead Zimbabwean.
I don't know if Mr. Osmili Tamvani Manjola, I've Googled him, I've checked him out.
He may or may not be alive, so in some ways you owe him an apology.
I do.
Because you've got his passport.
Yes, I have. And ironically, one of my friend, David Magama, who is a performer here in Cardiff, he's from Bulawayo. So every time he comes to me, he taps me and says, well, you are technically a Zimbabwean now, and you. But Mula, this is the thing. In order to leave Russia, you need an exit visa. So I had this passport, but I needed an exit visa. Yeah, so and this is the complicated bit. And in Metishi, I stood on a bridge. I had lost all hope. I did what Molang Mambo did to me at the cemetery, but I didn't have I had vodka. But I didn't understand that in order to invite the gods, you have to give them more of the vodka. So what I was doing was I'll give them like a tiny bit, and I gulped it in it. So I was drunk, but I had bird feathers, and I tied them, and I did all my rumelele. And there was a police officer who guards this bridge, and he was with his gun. And at any given time, as a black person, they will stop you, even lock you up. But this guy looked at me, looked at what I was doing. Maybe he thought, maybe I'm giving up the ghost. But I did all of my rumelele, and I'm sure the gods of my ancestors came, because everything that happened after that then saw me leaving Russia with the passport of a 64-year-old Zimbabwean. Yeah.
If someone read your memoir, or indeed listened to it, they'd get a sense of someone who has challenge after challenge after challenge, woe after woe after woe, and things get tough and then only get tougher. And yet, when I first met you, there was no evidence of that person in front of me, because every time I've ever met you, Eric, you have laughed, and you have got this communicable laugh, which is as ripe as exploding fruit. It's just communicable in that sense. So your story is also about the triumph of spirit.
That is correct. Yes, that is correct. Because I look at it now. Finally, my mother's wish has come true. I didn't go to Belgium. I came to Wales. And where I am in my life now is not. Maybe if I had gone to Belgium, I don't know what would have come of it. But look at where I am now. So I look at those past memories, and sometimes I just laugh. You know, I'm like, what is the worst that can happen? I might not be able to pay my council tax, but I can negotiate with the council. Or if I can't pay my rent, I can negotiate with my landlord. You know, these are basic things that everybody struggles with. There's nothing. Yes, there's nothing. If something happens to me, I can run to the police. I've got all of these things to help me grow. So I have finally made it to the land of milk and honey. You know.
So the book is now available both in printed form. You can also listen to it. But of course it's not the end of the story, because presumably there'll be more parts to this memoir, because you've lived a full and fulsome life since you arrived in Wales. So presumably there's another book somewhere on the horizon. Yes.
That is why if you listen to or read the memoir, you will see I deliberately left it in July 1999, and then fast forward to 2022. A lot has happened. The thing I'm concerned now is, how do I introduce this second part of the book? Is it how when I went to Cameroon for the first time and my mom called me Oscar? Like, I'm not my dad. She saw me as my father. Or when I won the Creative Wales Award, or when I was accepted at King's to do my PhD, like, where do I start? You know, there are so many beautiful, wonderful things have happened. And so this is where I am. So I thought, in order to bridge that gap, I'll bring out the Homelands, the poetry book that came out in April. Through this book, people will understand the past, the present, and what is going to happen in the future.
Do you see yourself as a poet, or indeed a playwright, because you've written plays, or as a writer of prose, as you've done with your memoirs, or as a novelist in the making, because you're obviously using Cameroon as the backdrop to a novel now? Or are you all of these and comfortably so?
I am all of those and comfortably so, Mala. In terms of writing fiction, I am learning. I'm learning to write from the third person. I'm removing myself completely from the I. I told my daughter that one day I'm going to write a version of this memoir, but I'm going to kill the protagonist, and it will make a perfect sense.